Alright guys, today I'll be giving you my top 10 coasters at King's Dominion. This is definitely a very good park, and while its coaster collection is definitely top heavy, they have some pretty good rides in that supporting cast. Of course, there are two coasters that can't make the top 10, and one of them is Great Pumpkin Coaster, which I don't even have the credit yet, but I just know it's a useless ENF miler. Moving on. We've also got Woodstock Express, which would be a pretty fun family wooden coaster if those trains weren't egregiously tight. I know I'm definitely a bigger guy, but those trains are real cramped and there's not much airtime on this ride to redeem itself. The park will also be adding Tera next year, so I'll tell you guys where I think that would rank at the end of this video. But let's get right into the top 10, with number 10 being Anaconda. This is pretty much a useless piece of junk. It doesn't do anything, all the inversions are very forceless. Those corkscrews at the end in particular do absolutely nothing. And the ride itself is pretty rough and janky, which to me doesn't matter. But it just doesn't do anything. That's my problem with it. It looks pretty, but the turns especially towards the end, they're nowhere near fast enough to actually throw you around. They're just there. That's the best way to describe this ride. It's there. Coming in at number 9 is Grizzly. Now, I know a lot of you guys love this thing. You guys say it's smooth now, it's got some really good airtime. It is smooth, which is a con for me, especially on wooden coasters. But it also has no airtime. The first drop throws you a little, but other than that, it's pretty much worthless. Just like Anaconda, it doesn't do much for me. So let's move on to number 8, which is Racer 75. Yes, I have Racer 75 as the best Woody in the park. It's okay. It definitely doesn't do a whole lot. There's only a couple moments of very weak airtime on this ride. It does duel somewhat frequently, so thankfully I have both credits. And quite frankly, both sides are pretty much the exact same, so they're back to back. And overall, it's a fun ride, but it's just another ride in the lineup. Coming in at number 7 is Backlot Stunt Coaster. This is definitely a step above Racer 75 in my eyes. It's got a pretty fun launch to start off and a pretty intense helix, but then after that it does meander a bit. I do like those trains, I like the effects that do work, but unfortunately not all the effects work. Kings Island is really the only one that has all the effects working. I will say more effects work on this one than the Canada's Wonderland one. But overall, it's a fun ride with a few good elements, but it's nothing you're going to want to marathon all day long. Coming in at number 6 is Reptilian. This is a very fun family coaster that definitely surprised me. This ride has some really fun twists and turns, which actually throws you pretty high up the trough. You definitely don't get airtime on this ride, but it's definitely fun getting those laterals and flying up the trough and feeling like you could just go overboard on it. And I will say the restraints are very weird. You basically sit down in this huge couch-like seat. The lap bar itself is this very weird T-bar with these huge pads around your thighs, and if you're riding with multiple people, someone's going to have to sit on someone's lap, which thankfully I haven't had to do. That would probably be very uncomfortable on a coaster, especially if you're an adult with another adult. But the capacity on this ride is very small, so I could see how ops would want that to happen. And overall, it's definitely a very fun ride. I do hear a little bit of complaining about it being rough because of the trough, but I don't really care. I don't think it's rough, and if it was rough, that would just add to the ride experience. But overall, it's definitely a fun ride. Coming in at number 5 is Flight of Fear. Now we're getting into some fun rides that I'd actually want to ride multiple times when I'm here. I think it's really weird that Backlot and this are the only coasters in Jungle X that have nothing to do with Jungle X. And Backlot could easily be fixed, but this, I don't know how you're going to change it to a Jungle X theme, especially since I think the theming's really good. In that queue line, you've got a lot of good UFO stuff. There's an actual UFO you go through to get into the station, which is really cool, and there's just a bunch of really nice space stuff all throughout this queue line. And then once you actually get on the ride, you've got a pretty intense layout. You've got a nice launch to start off. It's not the best launch in the world or anything, but it'll definitely get you. And you've got a few fun inversions, especially that corkscrew at the end. I think that's a pretty whippy inversion. And the other inversions and twists and turns in the darkness are pretty fun too. You can't really tell where you're going, which is why I like this one more than Joker's Jinx. I will say the premier trains don't bother me as much as they bother others. Like I said in other videos talking about these trains, I'm a lot more agile than your average park goer, so I can get in and out of these trains way faster than most people, but I could definitely see how other normal guests definitely have to struggle in and out of these trains, because they are pretty tight, but I personally don't have problems getting in and out, and I think the lap bars are pretty comfortable. They've got shin guards to hold them up during the ride, and if you're small or agile, then you shouldn't have a problem with these. So overall, Flight of Fear is definitely a very fun ride. Coming in at number 4 is Toonbeely. This might be the hottest take of the video, but I actually really like free spins, and this is a pretty fun one. I actually got an ornament loop on this my last visit, which is basically when you're starting upright and then you basically just do a full front flip over one of these Raven turns. It's very intense, it's disorienting, it's not that sustained, and I couldn't really get too many forces because it wasn't that sustained, but it was still really fun. And the rest of the ride is pretty fun, just getting a ton of inversions, especially if you throw your weight into this thing. I think free spins are really fun. A lot of people say they're just flat rides on track. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I'm a bigger fan of these inverting flat rides than most, and I will say the theming is also spectacular on this ride. You've got a lot of Jungle X theming throughout. I know this is the shorter model, but it's still definitely a fun time throwing your weight into those flips, and I do like the vest restraints because they do have a lot more give than B&Ms, so overall Toonbeely is definitely a fun, underrated ride. Coming in at number 3 is Dominator. This is definitely my favorite B&M floorless I've ridden, yes, even over Hydra and Kraken. I just think it's a really intense layout. That first drop is pretty whippy, and then you've got a solid vertical loop following it, a couple nice high-speed turns following that, and then a pretty snappy Cobra roll. It's not Alpengeist or Hulk or anything, but it's fun. It's definitely the best floorless Cobra roll. And then you have the drop off the mid-course, which actually gives a nice floater pop. It's nothing too special, but you definitely come out of your seat a good bit. It's definitely a lot stronger than something like Grizzly's drop, in my opinion. And then you've got a nice finale with those corkscrews, which are pretty whippy, and a nice turnaround section before heading back into the brakes. It's a very fun ride. It's a full ride. It's weird being a parking lot coaster, but it was a relocation, so I mean, what do you want them to do? Dress it up? Like, nah, they weren't going to dress anything up before the year 2022. So overall, Dominator's definitely a really fun ride and a must-visit every time you come here. Now we're into the big two, and everyone knew what these two were before the video started. And if you know me, you know the order of them, but for those of you who don't know me, number 2 is Twisted Timbers. I honestly think this is one of the weaker RMCs. It's got an okay first drop. It's got the weakest RMC first drop. It feels like Iron Gwazi's death roll, but instead of getting mad violent ejector, you get graceful floater. It's okay. And then you've got a pretty lackluster start with a couple speed hills which give floater and an overbank turn, but then you hit the best part of the ride, which is those triple camelbacks, which do hit you with some good sustained ejector. The rest of the ride features some pretty mediocre RMC airtime, but that being said, mediocre RMC airtime is still very violent. You're definitely getting chucked out of your seat very hard. And I feel like the end is pretty lackluster with that final 0G roll and a couple other twists and turns and a couple more airtime pops before hitting the brakes, which aren't the strongest things in the world. I feel like this ride is very good in the middle, but the start and the end aren't really all that special. But Twisted Timbers is still a top 25 worthy coaster for me at the end of the day. I mean, it's a mid-tier RMC, so it's gonna be. It could be number 1 at a lot of other parks, but unfortunately for Twisted Timbers, it's got Pantherian to compete with, which is the number 1 coaster at King's Dominion, and a top 5 coaster overall for me. It is one of, if not the most intense coaster in the world for positive Gs and laterals. This thing will absolutely crush you. On that first turn and on that turn before the trimmed hill, you get some of the most violent positive Gs ever. You definitely feel yourself graying out, and if I was a little more dehydrated, I might have blacked out. And those laterals and the triple snaps especially, and that last turn before the brakes are, oh my god, they're so aggressive. The airtime on this ride is pretty underrated too, I must say. And the sense of speed is just unmatched. No other ride makes you feel this fast. especially when you're low to the ground, hitting all these insanely intense maneuvers. The biggest thing I look for in rides is extreme ejector airtime, but this ride's so good in every other aspect that it doesn't matter. So that's the current top 10 coasters at King's Dominion. Now, where will Tera rank? A lot of you guys are saying number 3. I'm going as low as number 6. I do not think this will be a very good ride. I think this will be a 6, maybe even 5 out of 10, 7 out of 10 potentially, but I'll call it a 6 out of 10 for now until I ride it. It looks very lackluster. The testing footage looks absolutely sluggish. It definitely could speed up later. This might not be its final launch speed. Hopefully it won't be, but who cares? It's still a lackluster layout. The layout itself is very boring, and even if it does speed up slightly, all the airtime moments definitely will not give airtime. If you just look at how it takes, the couple airtime moments that they built into the ride, you definitely will stay right in your seat. The launch will definitely be the best part of the ride. It should be somewhat punchy. I don't know. It might be the best launch in the park, but Flight of Fear is pretty good, so it might not be. But what's cool about this launch is I was looking at the testing footage, and the wing seats look like they actually sort of bounce on this launch. So if that happens, then it could be a weird launch, sort of just bouncing up and down during it. Not pipeline style, obviously. You're not going to get airtime, but it'll be a little rough, which is interesting. The theming on this ride also looks pathetic. Even if they end up building what they plan to build in the animations with those sort of ruins and statues, whatever, that would still be a slap in the face to Volcano, which was one of the coolest structures in any park. And unfortunately, I never got to see it, but just looking at photos and videos, that thing looked amazing in the middle of the park. And unfortunately, they got rid of that for what seems like absolutely nothing currently. I'm not saying they're done with it. They could definitely add some more theming later on, but right now it's pathetic. And like I said, the layout just looks forceless. It looks like about on par with Valraven, but with a launch, so it definitely will be better than Valraven, I think. But I gotta tell you, I just think this ride's gonna be lackluster. So that is my top 10 coasters at King's Dominion and my prediction for Tera. Let me know what you guys think of that prediction for Tera and the entire list down in the comments below. And of course, make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.